SicEm365 Radio. It's time for our weekly segment with Sam Bradshaw of SicEm365.com.
Sam Bradshaw this week on Thursday. Normally, as I mentioned, will be Fridays. He's traveling. He joins us SicEm365 Radio and 365 Sports. Okay, Sam, you have done a lot of things from breaking down eyeballs and TV and all that for schools, but now we get games. How are you just excited about there's an actual football game where you could start to have evidence?
Thanks for having me on, and I am so excited football's back. I'm looking forward to seeing a couple Big 12 teams on TV tonight, but I'm most of all looking forward to seeing what the Bears got this season, just with a lot of new faces on the back end on defense and a lot of new faces outside at the skill positions on offense, but a lot to look forward to in the trenches.
All right, so let's discuss Albany first and what Coach Gattuso, he's a guy that, of course, had a great run at Duquesne. He's now in the early tenure of what he's doing at Albany. They've played Syracuse. They've played Pittsburgh. Now they're playing Baylor. If you were to say what is their strength, if they had one, what would it be?
I would say that they've got a really good passing offense structurally. The way they run their offense, they do a really good job scheming up the pass, and I think they're a very sound defensive team. I think they've run into a little problem with the Jimmies and the Joes over the last couple seasons. But, this is a program where a lot of those kind of schemes and a lot of this coaching staff took them to their first ever FCS playoff win back in 2019. And it's a good coaching staff. I mean, offensively, they've had a lot of success. Defensively, Gattuso was a defensive line coach for both Pitt and Maryland. He was actually at Pitt with working as a D-line coach under both Paul Rhodes and also a friend of the show, Phil Bennett. Definitely more of a quarters scheme with four-down look defensively, which is going to be a bit of a throwback to what Baylor was running mid-decade and what a lot of teams in the Big 12 are running for that matter. So it's going to be an interesting matchup. They tend to go small on their personnel in order to get more speed on the field, and they'll take some chances in coverage as a result.
Sam, what do you think we will see from Baylor at the skill positions this week? Especially, they're not going to try to show much against Albany before they have BYU. So what do you expect we'll see?
I expect we'll see them lean heavily on the run just to keep things off of film. BYU's defensive staff knows Grimes. They know generally what he wants to do based on what kind of personnel he has. He was in Provo for however long he happened to be there, several years. So, they're going to have a good idea of what's coming. But the thing is, I just want to see how the individual players step up. I want to see a receiver kind of take the job of being that number one guy and really step in. I want to see those running backs run hard and make good cuts, good vision, and get downhill. And defensively, I'm really hoping to see what we can identify on the back end of the defense. How are the new faces that are replacing Kalen Barnes, that are replacing JT Woods, that are replacing Jalen Petrie? How are they going to step in and do a good job of really allowing Baylor to stay on a Big 12 title track?
Sam, I know we're not going to see the full meal deal in week number one, but how do you anticipate this offense changing with Blake Shapen now leading the charge, the offensive line returning in mass, and as you said, questions at the skill spots, but it's going to be a different look, it feels like. In what ways do you think that will be?
I think you'll have a little bit more of a drop-back passing game because Shapen has a greater command of it than Bohannon did, at least from the starts that they had last season. And I think that you're going to have a little bit less of the quarterback run game. Shapen can still run it a little bit the way that you saw guys like Nick Florence or Charlie Brewer run it for Baylor at times. But you also noticed that Brewer got hurt repeatedly, and Shapen actually got hurt running the ball against Oklahoma State in the Big 12 title game. So you can't run him that frequently or else you run that risk. But the short passing game, his ability to buy time and scramble, I think you're going to see a little bit more of a wide open scheme the way that you saw BYU be a little more open than what Baylor did this past season because they had Zach Wilson. They had a quarterback that they felt could deliver at unorthodox angles. They had a quarterback that could buy time scrambling and deliver with accuracy and on time. It was night and day from what we've seen in the passing game most of the season to what you saw in the Big 12 title game for the first 3 quarters or first 2.5 quarters before Shapen got hurt. where the ball was getting out of his hand, it was coming out accurately, and it was putting a really good Oklahoma State defense through their faces.
Sam, you mentioned the back end of the defense. They have an amazing front, at least it should be, based on who's back, and not just the experience, but the players and talent. The linebackers are deep. Who do you kind of think might jump out of that group on the back end and become? No one's going to become Jalen Petrie. No one probably is J.T. Woods, but maybe somebody who becomes their number one playmaker, if not Al Walcott.
Well, I think Al Walcott's certainly a candidate moving to that star position because you have a guy that started for him at corner, which gives you a lot of coverage flexibility there, but is also physical enough to mix it up on blitzes and defend against the run. But also Devin Neal, who's seeing time both at star and at safety, because I think there may have been an injury with Walcott, and he's probably coming back. I'm not entirely sure on the exact details there, but those two guys would be the initial ones I'd look at. Neal is just a freak, absolute freak of nature physically. Can play safety really well, can play star really well. And then Mark Milton at corner should be an interesting one to see them step into the starting role, along with Lorando Jackson, who moved from star to corner. I mean, all four of those guys are guys that I'm really looking at. I mean, Christian Morgan's going to be a reliable starter at that boundary safety position, coming in for another year as a starter. I mean, you've got speed and you've got talent across the board, but, Neal and Walcott would be the initial ones I'd look for.
Sam Bradshaw, S11 with us, SicEm365 Radio Football Analyst.
Sam, is there a way to get a 5 tight end set out on the field?
There's a way. Ben Sims and Drake Dabney and all of them, they're not shy about putting them in the slot. So, I mean, it might actually be really funny just to do it just to see if the opponent calls timeout so they can substitute.
They have enough that they could do that, and that doesn't include what they would do with Dylan Doyle.
Exactly. I think it was the BYU game last year where he was the unexpected winner of college fantasy for the week. Whoever picked him up off waivers was just grinning ear to ear. Just unexpectedly, the linebacker got a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown.
Sam, what do you think about Mazuka and what he can bring to the table? Paul interviewed him a few weeks ago. We know that last year he was a part of it a little bit, but it looks like he will get the start at left guard, and he brings a nasty streak.
Well, from what I've heard, he's one of the most gifted guard prospects on the entire roster. And anytime you have somebody with that much potential NFL upside, if the light comes on, you've really got something. And I'm looking forward to seeing what he does, but I'm also looking forward just to seeing what the depth does in general, because the guys that they've got coming up in the pipeline are athletically superior across the board to a lot of what we've seen at Baylor over the last couple decades, just from can this guy play in the NFL if the light comes on standpoint. They're definitely gambling that they can develop some high upside guys that may not have the best film in some of these cases. And, Maskua is one of those guys that you look at him, that, hey, if he can play half as good as he looks getting off the bus, he's going to have a chance to stick in the NFL. That's that kind of guy. So being able to have a guy like that, that's huge.
One more thing, and it's not about so much on the field, but you wrote numerous columns with graphics and data and all of that on the TVs and eyeballs and conferences and so much more. And people nationally recognized how good it was. It wasn't biased. It was you giving facts. How much fun did you have? I was very tedious, I'm sure, but just kind of going through all that the last 3 to 4 months?
It was fun, and it was fun to finally kind of pay off what I had started working on actually a few years ago. Back in 2016, I was about to do a series like that, and then the site moved platforms, so it never got published. And then the next year, they hired rules, so people were wondering more about what are we going to run instead of television numbers, and it just kind of kept getting pushed to the back. But no, it was fun, and I plan to do some more periodically as time goes on. It's just one of those where you want to provide at least some controls for some variables that are leading to bad conclusions across the board, so you can really get an apples to apples look. Because if you're comparing somebody's game on ABC Labor Day weekend to somebody's game on Fox Sports 2 at noon and trying to draw any relevant conclusion, it's not going to lead you there. So just trying to find new ways to bring in fair but realistic considerations for the variables that skew these analyses all the time.
You do a good job with it. Thank you, Sam. Look forward to the weekly segment. Sam Bradshaw with us, Sic'em365.